guys, Matt Cobb here with another daily devotion for you. We're going to continue on in the book of James as we've been working through kind of the practical Christianity, how we live out our lives, how we live out our faith in day-to-day circumstances and so forth. Well, now, as we're getting into this last chapter of James, he starts out with kind of a warning to the rich. But I want to kind of spin this from a different standpoint of the proper handling of wealth. Because James gives all these warnings to the rich about things that they're doing that are wrong. And so I want to look at the flip side as well, too, of the things that we should be doing correctly. So I'm going to read the passage and then I want to highlight three primary things for you guys. So this is James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. It says, "Come now, you rich people, weep and wail over the miseries that are coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have stored up treasure in the last days. Look, the pay that you withheld from the workers who mowed your fields cries out, and the outcry of the harvesters has reached the ears of the Lord of armies. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and have indulged yourselves. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the righteous who does not resist you." So, the first thing that I want to talk about and to share and to just kind of highlight and preface as we're going into this is that God does not condemn wealth, and God is not opposed to people having wealth. But what he does is he wants people to be wise and to be careful with wealth and blessings that are entrusted with them. I mean, even 1 Timothy 6:10, it's often misquoted that says money is the root of all evil. But what 1 Timothy 6:10 actually says is the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So it's when we place too much value on money and it becomes like an idol in our lives, the thing that we live for, that it causes the problem. So God is not, he's not down on wealth. We don't have to all be impoverished and take a vow of poverty or things like that. God isn't against wealth, but he does want us to use it the correct way. So that's why I'm calling this the proper handling of wealth. And the first thing that I want you to see from what James is talking about is that we need to be wiser and not a miser. A little play on sounds, but it's the aspect of being generous. Don't hoard up things for yourself. In the first sections of this passage, he's saying your wealth has rotted, your clothes are moth-eaten, even the silver and gold is corroded. So what this all speaks to is that it's being sitting around. It's not being used. I mean, when you're wearing clothes, they can't be moth-eaten. It's when they sit in a closet or when they sit being unused that it gets moth-eaten. You know, gold and silver that's corroding is because it's being sitting around. It's exposed to elements rather than being passed and used. And, you know, even if you wear jewelry on your hand, you know, the constant cleaning and things that we do keeps those metals clean and they don't corrode, but if they just sit around. And so what James is saying is that you're hoarding up. He even says, you know, you've stored up treasure in the last day. And so it's this aspect of I'm gathering everything around and look at all that what I have. And God is saying, I'm not blessing you to just be a storehouse. I'm blessing you to be a blessing to others. So I think that the flip side that James would also say is that, you know, be wise with what you have. Don't hoard things up, but instead be generous. The second thing is to be fair and just and don't cheat others. He talks about this aspect, you know, the pay that you withheld from the workers, the harvesters cry out and it's reached the Lord of armies. You know, when somebody is owed something from you, pay it. Don't withhold it back. Don't cheat them out of what they are due or earned. And I like to think that this is something that we can do, especially when you have employees that work with you, when you pay a salary to people or for doing something, that you have an opportunity to be generous beyond what they would even expect. They've agreed to work for so much pay. And so when you can go beyond that, then God is like, yes, that's the aspect that I'm trying to get in, the idea of generosity. Even Jesus, when he was sharing in Matthew 20, told this parable of the vineyard workers. And he's using this as an illustration for how salvation is equally free to everybody. But I think there's other layers in the parables that Jesus is given as well, too. You know, this landowner goes out at the beginning of the day, hires workers and says, I'll pay you a day's wage, which was what we called was 1 denarius. You would receive 1 denarius, a day's wage for working for a day. So he goes out first thing in the morning, hires people to do that. And then he goes out later, 3 hours later, and then 3 hours later, and then 3 hours later. And finally, there's like only 1 hour left to work in the day. He goes out and finds more people that are standing around. And he says, well, come, work in my field and I'll pay you what's fair. And so when all the workers come to get their wages at the end of the day, he starts with those that were hired last, who, you know, if you think that you've worked 12 hours for a day, that if you've only worked 1 hour, you'll get 1/12 of a denarius, you know. But instead, he gives them a whole denarius. And then it gets to the ones that were hired first, and they're like, well, we slaved in the hot sun all day, and then we're only getting 1 denarius. And the landowner says, I'm not being unfair. You agreed to work for me for a day's wage, and that's what I gave you. If I want to be generous with somebody else, that's for me to decide with my money. And so clearly, when it comes to salvation, the kingdom of heaven, all of us have equal access and equal standing with God, regardless of how long we have been a believer or so forth. But I think the other layer that we can see in this is that being generous, when we have the opportunity to those who are owed something, when we can be generous, it speaks to the character of God. It speaks to the heart of God, who is generous with us as well, too. So don't cheat, be generous. And then the third thing that I want to highlight is to look out for and think of others first. James is saying in this last section that you've lived luxuriously and you've indulged yourselves. You've fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. I mean, crazy imagery that he's using. And again, it just speaks to this aspect of we need to be thinking about others first. That we need to be concerned about what other people have, not about getting everything for ourselves first, but thinking about others that we can be a blessing towards. You see, God wants to pour out blessings in our lives, but he's not going to pour out blessings if we're just going to hold it in. We need to be the funnel of God's blessings into the lives of others. And the more we can do that, the more he can build our funnel bigger and bigger and bigger so that we can be a blessing to more and more and more people. But when we're just a sponge soaking up so much, you know, we can only be filled so much, and then we just sit and sour and stink when we're not being wrung out. So be encouraged, guys. Wealth is not a bad thing, but God does want us to use it wisely to be a blessing to other people. So be wiser, not a miser. Be generous. 2, be fair. Don't cheat people. And then 3, look out and think of the interests of others first. All right, guys, hope you're encouraged this weekend. Just be praying as we're ending up this year that God will do amazing things at the close of the end of 2021, and we'll start 2022 looking forward to what God is going to do in this next new year as well, too. And maybe we'll be finished with the book of James before the end of the year. We only have a couple more sections in chapter 5, so we should be good. But anyway, have a great weekend, guys, and we'll catch you later.